Hello, my name is Nicole Flint, and I am going to give an introduction of the study that we replicated, as well as discuss the purpose and the methods and review my data and graphs. So the study that we chose to replicate was called Using Real-Time Visual Feedback to Improve Posture at Computer Workstations. We had to make a few modifications to the original study, such as lowering the words per minute that was required to be in the study, as well as modifications to the furniture. In the original study, the furniture that was used included a chair with armrests, and not all members had that, so we had to make a few modifications to ensure everyone, the study could work for everyone. So the purpose of the study was to examine the effects of a multi-component intervention that included discrimination training, feedback, and self-monitoring on postural behavior at computer workstations in a simulated office environment. Our methods included, for participants, we had a total of 5 female individual participants in the study. Were all students at Ball State University. Participants had to demonstrate typing proficiency of 20 words per minute, and this was calculated using a typing tool website called typingtest.com. Our materials and setting included all sessions were recorded using a camera. The videos were uploaded to participants' laptops or computers for scoring. Each participant was recorded for 20 minutes for 2 sessions per day while transcribing a text from typingtest.com called Aesop's Fable. During each session, participants were alone in an office-like setting that included a laptop or computer, a desk, a chair, and we had no specifications on the type of computer, desk, or chair. The definitions of our behaviors, which in this study was on safe and at-risk postures, were based off of OSHA guidelines. I'll review those in a second. In regards to our data collection, as I said, we used cameras and recorded ourselves typing for 20-minute sessions for 2 sessions a day while transcribing the text and sitting at the computer workstations. And we took snapshots every 2 minutes of those recorded sessions, which equaled 10 snapshots per session. And we used an OSHA handout that had safe posture definitions on it to score those snapshots. So for each session, an overall safety score was calculated for each dependent variable by dividing the number of samples scored as safe, which was the numerator, by the total number of samples, which was the denominator. And words per minute was measured from the typing tool on typingtest.com. So for our baseline, what we did was each participant used typingtest.com to establish words per minute, and then baseline video was taken of each member recording themselves typing the same passage from typingtest.com for 20-minute sessions, 2 sessions per day. Participants then took snapshots every 2 minutes for each session, and then those snapshots were sent to a fellow participant for scoring. Members scored each snapshot using the safe or at-risk definitions. The safe definitions on the OSHA guideline handout. And then and we did not allow, when we scored our other members' postures, we did not allow that other member to see their scores. So we did not provide feedback during baseline. During the intervention phase, at the beginning of the intervention phase, each member reviewed the OSHA handout of the safe posture definitions for 5 minutes before starting our sessions. And so then we followed the same procedure with 20-minute sessions, 2 sessions per day. We took snapshots every 2 minutes of those sessions. And for intervention phase, we scored our own postures using the OSHA guidelines, and then we sent those same snapshots to another group member. They scored those snapshots and then provided feedback to us. So for IOA, it was calculated. We had a chosen participant that scored snapshots from 33% of all of the sessions. To do this, each participant sent snapshots and scores from sessions 4, 6, 8, 10, and 12 to that chosen participant. The participant scored the snapshots and then calculated IOA by comparing the scores. In regards to treatment fidelity, every participant used a recording device to observe that there were no distractions while completing the sessions and that individuals were all in a quiet room and performed the task at the same time every day for each session using the same materials as well as the same website. This is the handout that we used to score our postures. So this we received from the Occupational Safety and Health Administration website, and it has pictures showing good working positions and safe postures as well as the definitions. So the safe posture definitions, I'll go through those real quick. For the head and neck position, it's the head being upright and in line with the torso and not bent down or back, or the head facing slightly upward on the plane of the upper body. For the back position, it was the lower lumbar part being supported by the chair's back support, and the angle of the back and the thigh being between 100 to 110 degrees while seated. The safe position for the arms was defined as the inside angle of the elbow being between 90 to 120 degrees. For the hand and wrist position, the safe definition were flat wrists not being bent up or down when typing. And then for the leg position, the safe definition were the knees being bent and forming an angle between 90 to 120 degrees, with the feet being flat on the floor. This first graph is my words per minute, and as you can see, there was a pretty steady increase there of words per minute going through baseline and intervention. I think I topped out at about 70 words per minute. And the second graph there is the percentage of safe samples for my head and neck posture. And during baseline, I was kind of up and down, but then during the intervention phase, I was stabilized at about 100%. The next slide shows the percentage of safe samples for my back posture, which as you can see was 100% through baseline and intervention, so nothing really changed there. My percentage of safe samples for my arms, during baseline I had a little dip there, but then I came back up and was 100% throughout intervention as well. This slide shows the percentage of safe samples for my hand and wrist position. I started out in baseline a little bit lower. It looks like I went down to about 80% during session 2, but then I gradually came back up, and then throughout intervention phase I was at 100% of my safe postures. For the percent of safe samples for my legs, my first session was pretty low. It looks like around 70%, and then I came back up and was 100% throughout the rest of baseline and into the intervention phase.
Hi, I'm Denisha Detreville, and I'll be going over the literature review. One would believe that the aches and pains that we feel in our body are a result of stress from work, although that may be true, but there are a number of other reasons. A number of strains and aches that are projected on our bodies have to do with the posture our body is in throughout the workday. You may be sitting in a meeting at your desk or even sitting at a table eating lunch. Incorrect posture could affect your body. As a result of incorrect posture, you may experience a muscle disorder. The disorder affects the soft tissue or the muscles, nerves, tendons, joints, cartilage, or spinal disc. In a study conducted in 2008, participants were engaged in typing at their workstations and a mock workstation. At their actual workstations, participants completed typing training. During the training, posture was recorded and scored as safe or at risk. That's the same thing that we did in our study. The scoring only took place while the participants was typing. There was no score while using the mouse. The experiment was identical to the mock station. However, the participants weren't allowed to get paid. Well, we weren't allowed to get paid either. The dependent variable in the experiment was the leg position. We also had a leg position where we had to make sure our legs were at least a 90-degree angle. The leg position was scored safe if the upper thighs were parallel to the floor and the lower legs were vertical to the floor. During the experiment, leg position was scored every 40 seconds for a total of 10 times per session, where for us, we had 20-minute sessions, 20-minute sessions, and we took snapshots of each session during 2 minutes. The mock workstation leg position was recorded on a webcam that only focused on the participants' legs while they were engaged in typing tasks. Well, in our study, it's similar, but we use our phones, iPads, or some kind of recording. But it showed our whole body. And another study I saw was with yoga positions. One can only imagine how your position matter or your posture matter when practicing yoga. Yoga exercises help improve bad posture and even revert hyperkiosis. Hyperkiosis is a condition of the spine which causes the region of the spine with the ribs attached to be more curved than it should. So basically, like a hunchback. One posture is important dimension of health, which does not get the attention it deserves. Your posture influences the ligaments of the spine and thereby overall health of your body. In a study evaluated by McCain, it required participants to self-monitor their postures. We also had to self-monitor our postures. The study was the first organizational behavior management study that focused on real-time, real feedback as a source of self-monitoring and repeated self-monitoring opportunities delivered through a computer. Overall, the study was effective in improving safe performance for almost all target behaviors. The first graph is of my percentage for safe leg position. I started off at 50 in the first session. I gradually increased to 100 and I stayed at 100 throughout the baseline phase. As you see, during my intervention, I started at 100 and it was consistent throughout the whole intervention phase. The next graph is of my arms. And here you will see the percentage where in baseline I started at a 60. I increased throughout sessions 2 and 3. Then in session 4 I dropped. Then I increased again in session 5. And by the end of session 6 I decreased again throughout baseline. In intervention I started pretty well. Then I decrease, increase, decrease, and I increased again, and I stayed consistent throughout intervention. This graph shows the percentage of my hand and wrist. Here I had trouble in baseline. I started at 0 I went up to 10%, then I went back down to 0% throughout baseline. Intervention, I started at 10%, I decreased to 0, then I gradually increased to about 60%, and from there it was increasing and decreasing of my hand and wrist posture throughout intervention. I ended up at 50. This graph is of my percentage for my back support. Now here I started at 60. It was consistent to 60 in session 2. Session 3 I increased to about 90%, stay consistent, then I increased again in session 5 to 100%, but I decreased again throughout baseline. In intervention, I started about at a 70. I increased, then I decreased, and I increased again at session 12, and I stayed consistent at a 100% throughout the rest of intervention. The last graph shows my percentage of head and neck. In baseline, I started at an 80%. Then in the session 2, I decreased, but in sessions 3, 4, and 5, I increased. But session 6, I decreased where it was unsafe. Now in intervention, it was pretty rocky, a lot of up and down. I started at about a 90% in intervention for session 7. I decreased in session 8, and I increased in 9 and 10. But in sessions 11, 12, and 13, I decreased a lot. But in session 14, I increased back to a 70%, a 70, 90%. It's 90%.
Hi, my name is Maribel, and I'm going to be presenting on the results of our project. I'm going to start with my graphs. I'm going to go over some of the graph parts. We have in the vertical left, we have the percentage of safe sample. On the horizontal line, we have the number of sessions. On the vertical right side, we have worst time per minute. Now during baseline, I started with a 60 and then went to 100. My mean score was 90. During intervention, I had 100 and I did have 180, and my mean score was a 98. Now moving to my graph and my arms posture, I had a baseline of 0, and my intervention went from 80 to 100. So my mean score for baseline was a 0, and for intervention was a 98. So we can say that I definitely did improve in those two phases. Now I'm going to be discussing my graph for hand and wrist. During baseline, I had a pretty stable data of between 60 and 50, some points a little bit below. My mean score was 43. During intervention, I went all the way up to 100s with a mean score of 99, so I definitely did improve. Now my graph with head and neck, I started with 100 and had a decreasing trend, but my data at the end was stable between the 60 and 50 range. My mean score for baseline was a 62. During intervention, I went to 100s with a mean score of 100, so I definitely improved. Now the last graph that I'm going to be discussing it's my leg posture. During baseline, I had 100%, and in intervention phase, I had 100%, except for one session that I got a 90%. Now, I would like to bring to everybody's attention my words per minute. My productivity did get affected during intervention. I had a mean score of 40 words per minute, and during intervention, my mean score went down to 34. Now, I would like to point out that during intervention, you do see a slight increase in trend on my words per minute. And some of the last scores, the last 3 scores, were extremely similar, if not the same, as baseline scores. So I did go back to my baseline scores eventually. Now we're looking at a chart I created that has all the mean scores of the participants, and you can easily see baseline and intervention mean scores for every single one of the postures we looked at. We have all made improvements in our posture. The only 2 that I would say in the mean scores did not show improvement was Denisha during the head and neck. She had a mean score in baseline of 87, and during intervention she went down to 85. I also went down, as I stated before, during the leg posture, that I had 100% in baseline, and my mean score in intervention went down to a 99. But every single one of the participants, other than those 2, increased their mean scores, showing that they improve in posture. Now, on my last slide, I have the multiple baseline graph of all 5 participants. I was unable to fit all 5 without making the graphs not really that visible. So I have Kate on the right side of the graph. And we also made 5 different graphs, multiple baseline graphs, because we had every single one of the postures. But for the sake of time, I can't really go over every single one of them. So I chose the back posture. And as we can see in baseline, we have with Nicole the 100%. And as we can see as well, her actually words per minute increased. Nicole's mean score was 58 during baseline for her words per minute, and they actually went up 11 points to a mean score of 69. As I spoke before, this is with my graph. My mean score for back was 90, and for intervention was 98. And I already talked about my difficulty, I guess, with the words per minute, since I was the only one that had a decrease in productivity. Here's Selena's graph, and she had a mean score of 92 during baseline and a 99 mean score during intervention. She also had an increase in productivity from baseline. Baseline, she had a mean score of 48, and in intervention, she had a mean score of 58. So her mean score actually went up 10 points. For Denisha, her back posture for baseline was a mean score of 82 with a nice increase in trend. And for intervention, she had a mean score of 93. Now her words per minute, she had a mean score of 24, and during intervention she had a mean score of 26. So she had a 2-point improvement. So she actually improved in her productivity. Now Kate had a two sessions that were pretty high and then went down. So her mean score for baseline was 33, but as we can see in intervention, she had 100, so mean score of 100. Her productivity, her words per minute, the mean was 40 during baseline, and during intervention, it increased to 50. So the majority of participants did have a 10-point increase in productivity, except for Maribel, for me, who actually had a decrease of 6 points in productivity. And Denisha had a 2-point increase. So we had 3 people that had a 10-point increase. But overall, we all did better and learn a better posture.
There were 3 main limitations that we identified throughout this study. The first limitation was that a volunteer participant was needed to replace a participant that was injured prior to data collection. The volunteer participant, unlike the other 4 participants, was not informed on what data was being collected on and had no previous knowledge of the OSHA recommendations and guidelines for safe posture. Our group saw this as a limitation because the volunteer participants' baseline differed from that of the other participants. This possibly could have been because the other participants were already trying to adhere to the OSHA recommendations and guidelines for safe posture, therefore not representing a true baseline. The second limitation was the differing setting, furniture use, and keyboard or computer. Each participant either worked in their home setting or a work setting, used their own personal armchair and desk, and a personal laptop or desktop computer with a keyboard. Because there was no consistency across the furniture, setting, and computer or keyboard used, this may have caused a difference in how posture was recorded as safe or at risk across participants. The third limitation was physical conditions. A couple of our participants had physical conditions that may have contributed to their difference in scores on safe postures. One of our participants had missing fingers and was missing a leg. This could have contributed to her leg posture scores being different from the rest of the participants and may have accounted for her lower productivity or words per minute. Another one of our participants has an eye condition that prevents her from looking down while keeping her neck straight. Therefore, she scored poorly on each session for the head and neck posture. Another physical condition that could be seen as a limitation was momentary bodily pain that the participants may have been experiencing while the session was occurring. And at that point, the session couldn't be stopped for them to necessarily readjust their body position. So they just had to stick with it, and this could have affected their posture. Future research is needed on this subject. We believe that real-time feedback immediately following each intervention phase would be helpful in increasing safe posture positions through the intervention phases. This would give participants time to reflect on what they would like to do differently or what they need to change in order to receive the safe posture scores that the researcher is searching for. Researchers should also ensure in future studies that their participants are in the same setting and using the same furniture and computer or keyboard. This can help eliminate observer drift when scoring safe posture positions. The top graph shows my volunteer participants' head and neck posture. Baseline and intervention phases remained at a fairly high safe posture percentage, although they both did dip a little bit towards the middle and end. The bottom graph shows my volunteer participants' safe back posture. You can see it started very high at the beginning of the baseline, but quickly decreased to an at-risk posture, and for intervention remained safe at 100% the entire time. The first graph here is my volunteer participant's hand and wrist safe posture position. Through baseline and intervention, she remained at a high safe posture percent, although there was a decrease at the end of the baseline phase. The bottom graph shows my volunteer participant's arm posture. Baseline and intervention phases look very similar. They each started with a low safe posture percentage and quickly increased and remained stable. This graph shows my volunteer participant's safe leg posture position. You can see that through the baseline phase, she remained at an at-risk posture. Quickly following in the intervention phase, her safe posture position increased to a safe position where her feet remained on the ground and her legs were uncrossed.
Hi, my name is Selena Sizemore, and I was one of the participants for this project. I am going to go ahead and share my results with you at this time. As you can see on the slide, there is two graphs. One graph shows my safety posture score for my back, and one shows the posture safety score for my arm. In the first graph that I'm going to go over, it is going to be the percentage of safe sample posture for back. In my baseline condition, I was between a 70 and 100%. In my intervention, I received a steady score of 100% in my safety for my back, and then at the last session, it dropped down. My words per minute was affected in this, and I was able to increase my words per minute as my safety increased as well. As you will see, the words per minute is the same in every graph. So in every graph, my words per minute did increase. My next graph that I'm going to go over is of my arm, and it's the safety posture of the arms. So in this graph, in baseline, my safety was extremely low. It did not go over 10%. In intervention, I was around 80% for the first session of intervention phase, and then I received a 100% safety score for the remainder of those sessions. In this, I am going to discuss my safety scores for my hand and wrist position as well as my leg positioning. The same guidelines were used by OSHA to score these. In this, my safety score at the beginning for baseline seemed to be increasing, but they were not at a steady level during baseline. My intervention phase, however, they were at 100% safety, and I was able to maintain that the whole time. My words per minute, as stated before, did increase throughout this project with the increase of my safety postures. Next graph is my legs. My legs were started very low in baseline and then jumped up and then they went back down. And then in the intervention phase, they did increase to a higher mean of safety scores. So overall, I increased with my leg positioning score for safety as well. The last graph that I'm going to go over dictates the results of my safe posture for my head and neck positioning. I received no higher than a 20% on safe posture scoring for baseline. And 3 out of the 5 sessions, I received a 0% for it. So I did not have a high score on my positioning for baseline. For my intervention phase, I was able to get my highest score to be around 30%. However, this still was not a drastic increase, and the improvement was not a steady improvement, as it was still very variable in the intervention phase. Although my head and neck positioning did increase some, it was not a drastic thing. But as I stated before, my overall words per minute did increase with the increase in my safety posture throughout this project. In conclusion, our study was able to increase the words per minute based on the increase of the posture safety of the individuals in our study. Overall, our study is a replication of Sigurdson and Austin 2008, in which we monitored safe posture based on recommendations and guidelines by OSHA. Participants used self-monitoring and real-time visual feedback to help increase their posture while typing at a workstation. From the baseline phase to the intervention phase, the participants increased their percent of safety posture scores, except for 2 participants. Maribel's percent of safety decreased for her legs, and Denisha's percent of safe posture scores decreased for her head-neck position. Overall, everyone's words per minute increased as their posture improved, except for Maribel, which was one of our outliers. Maribel's words per minute decreased as her posture improved. In baseline, she had an average of 40 words per minute and it decreased to 34 words per minute during the intervention phase. This is gone into in more detail in one of the limitations, which will be given by Kate. In the original study by Sigurdson and Austin, the results yielded a decrease in productivity by a mean of 11%. In comparison, the current study resulted in an increase in productivity when the safe posture increased. Overall, the current study resulted in increased words per minute as the posture increased in safety score. It is possible that this increase was due to several outside factors, such as the participants having previous knowledge of the study and information on the safe posture recommendations and guidelines provided by OSHA. Prior to the beginning baseline and intervention phases, participants also used personal laptops, in which may have increased their overall productivity. One of the participants stated that she used a laptop/computer tablet that sits low, so her head and neck posture was affected. As she stated, she needed to look down at the laptop when given feedback on this. She stated that it was due to a physical element. The current study's intervention may have been effective in increasing the participants' safe posture percentages because participants were able to discriminate safe versus at-risk postures and adjust their posture body as necessary to meet the OSHA recommendations and guidelines. Most participants' percent of safe posture increased or became more stable at the start of intervention, possibly due to feedback provided or review of the OSHA recommendations and guidelines. Another issue with the study may be that participants found it hard to motivate themselves to stay in a safe posture, but knowing that the research was important to earning a high grade and for obtaining good results might have contributed to the momentum and uptake in motivation of the individual. The volunteer participant may have been motivated to increase or remain in a safe posture to please the experimenter.